Hello, and welcome to Science of Strength, the evidence-based podcast with me, your host, Dr. Rosy Boa. And today we're going to be talking about what really happens when you take a break from pole, right? How long does it take to start losing strength? What will it look like to get strength back once you get back to pole? And also a little bit about the emotional component there, because that's a part of it, right? Before we dive into that, I do really quickly want to say shout out to my members. Y'all are great. I love you. You know that. And this episode actually was a request because we were talking about, detraining and losing tricks and just sort of how our lives change and our pole changes around them. Chloe, I know you and I have talked about this a bit, so shout out to Chloe. I know you're listening. And if you'd love to join us, please feel free. Science of Strength is also the name of the membership, just like the podcast. And I offer sliding scale pricing. So if you can afford the full price, fantastic. If times are a little bit tough and you want a little bit more support, if you're flush and you want to help support the community, there's a higher priced option as well. So totally up to you. If you are interested in the sort of combination of weird, nerdy science training stuff and also breaking down pole moves in a way that works for weird brains based on the evidence, it's me, I got a weird brain. And of course, freestyle. We're all about freestyle. We're all about flow. That's really the heart of the studio. And if you're like, ooh, I like those things, come on in. Water's fine. Anyway, that is beside the point, because the point today is talking about what happens when you're not doing pole. Right? What happens when you take a break? And I will say, first off, right off the bat, because I talk, with a lot of pole dancers and with a lot of people who are coming back to pole, don't beat yourself up, right? There is a reason you took the break. The first thing that happens is that you get the break that you needed for whatever reason, right? Maybe you've had a change in your life where pole just doesn't fit anymore for some period of time, for whatever reason. Maybe you're in a really stressful time of your life and you just don't have the capacity for pole. Maybe your finances aren't there. Maybe you don't have the time. Maybe you're injured. Maybe you've had a child. Maybe you're moving. Maybe you've got a new job. Maybe you work a night shift and you don't have any pole scheduling options to work for you, right? Maybe you're getting burnout, right? We talked about this in the episode, especially often folks who are very monotropic, right? Who are maybe autistic, will have like cycles, and maybe you just cycled out of a pole cycle and then later you come back in. Totally fine. Right? There is a reason you took a break. I want you to, whatever sort of like little voice that's inside you is like, you're bad for taking a break from pole. Just take it, pick it up. It's a screaming frog, and go put it outside in the frog pond where screaming is allowed and you don't have to listen to it, right? Be nice to yourself. Pole is a thing that you are doing for fun. It should be a fun, enjoyable activity. I love pole, right? Pole's my job. It's not that important. It's genuinely not that important. It is, for me, a big part of my mental health. It helps me feel better. But in the grand scheme of things, if I had to choose between pole or any one of my family members, they're going first, right? So just getting in that headspace. We're all going to have different seasons of life. We're all going to have times when various things in our life are going to have to take a backseat, and that is fine and normal and happens to everyone. And don't beat yourself up about it. And if you're working with a coach who is beating you up about it, maybe find a different coach. That's really not appropriate. In my professional opinion, I don't think you should be doing that. But that's sort of the emotional side, the social side. Let's talk about science. Let's talk about the body. What's actually going to happen if you take a break? So sometimes I will talk to somebody and they'll be like, oh, if I skip a single pole class, I immediately start to feel horrible. That, for me, sends up big red warning signs that you may have a dependency on pole. You may have a dependency on this behavior that goes beyond what is helpful. You should absolutely be able to skip a single class and have no real difference in your physical output, except maybe you feel a little bit more rested, right? If you immediately feel awful, I would reach out to a mental health professional. I would maybe look into exercise addiction, and just make sure that your relationship with pole is in a healthy place. So one class skipping, you genuinely should not be noticing any difference. You shouldn't be starting to feel weaker. So what sort of timelines are we looking at here? Well, they vary with different things. And today I'm mostly going to be talking about aerobic conditioning and then strength, because that's what a lot of the research is on. There's less work on flexibility. There is some work on balance. I'm going to talk a little bit about balance today. And then there's less work on, circus skills and pole skills for some reason, just like the funding's not there for the research. So I'm going to share what I've got, I feel like are solid citations for. And if y'all know of more work that is relevant, please reach out. I always like to be learning. I know you do too. General timelines, right? Something comes up, you have an extended period away from the pole. When are you going to start seeing changes in your body? So the first thing that you're going to notice is also one of the things that adapts most quickly once you come back, and that is your aerobic capacity, right? So you'll notice you start to feel out of breath a little bit sooner than you did. Your resting heart rate may change a little bit. Your VO2 max, not that I know what my VO2 max is, right? But the amount of oxygen that you can hold in your lungs might come down a little bit. And you're going to start to see that noticeably after about 2 weeks. So that's going from, whatever you were doing way down about 2 weeks to start noticing a change in aerobic capacity. That also tends to come up pretty quickly as well. Strength is interesting because it's a lot more variable, and it's also, I think, a lot slower than a lot of people tend to think. How quickly you lose strength will very much depend on how trained you are. In general, the stronger you are, the more slowly you lose strength, which is interesting. I think that would not necessarily be my a priori assumption based on no other evidence, but that does seem to be the case. 2022 study looking at very trained individuals, so people who are doing a lot of weightlifting, in Xiao et al. 2022. It'll be written in the down there. It's the one that starts with E. They were looking at very trained individuals, and they were looking at their 1 rep max. So what's the absolute maximum amount of weight you can bicep curl? So they really started to detrain. At 16 weeks, same 1 rep max, no difference. At 24 weeks, which is about 6 months, same 1 rep max. So they didn't see a measurable decrease in strength until 32 weeks into the detraining period for these very trained individuals. So if you're doing a lot, if you are really trained, it may take a long time for you to noticeably decrease your strength. Now, I will say this is looking at the 1 rep max. It is not necessarily looking at endurance. So you may come in and be real tired, but you're still going to have that strength, right? You'll have 1 beautiful rep. Now, again, that was for very trained individuals. You may say to yourself, well, Rosie, I just started pole. I am not a very trained individual. What about me? So this is from Helen et al. 2024. And they were looking at untrained individuals, and they got them in, and they're like, all right, you're on this workout program for about 10 weeks. And then they took them off the program for 10 weeks, and then they had the separate group that just continued. And yep, over the 10-week period, they absolutely did notice a decrease in these folks who'd only been training for 10 weeks. So not very trained, taking a longer break. Yep, there absolutely was a difference. But put a pin in that. We're going to come back to that in a moment, and I think you will be perhaps surprised by the results. So another thing that affects this is age. Particularly if you are older, the effects of strength training are going to happen much more quickly. Torment et al., 2005, they found a significant decrease in strength after 2 weeks of detraining, both strength and balance. And they had 2 age groups, and they did find this in the older age group. The older age group was ages 74 to 86. The younger age group, where they did not see any decrease over 2 weeks, were 60 to 73. So for those of y'all who are in your mid-70s and above, keeping up with it, keeping consistent, especially with balance. We know balance is very important for us as we age, just to be able to sort of live our lives and do stuff. Definitely keep doing it. So I know, I've worked with folks of all different ages, and sometimes I'll talk to people and they're late 20s or early 30s, and they're like, oh, now that I'm old, and I'm like, no, you're good. You're totally fine. You've got time, right? And all those scary Instagram things are like, when you're 30, your body starts to decay and you can never build muscle again. Absolutely not true. You can see strength training adaptation at any stage in your life cycle, at any age. You really genuinely can. Don't let people scare you. Don't let the marketing make you think that like the moment you turn 50, you turn into a pile of dust and poof off into the atmosphere. That's absolutely not the way it works. You can build strength, you can build skills, you can build flexibility at any stage in your life. And if you get to your mid-70s and you're taking, breaks for 2 weeks or longer, you're likely to see a little decrease in strength. So all that to say, how quickly you lose strength is going to depend on you, your level of training, and your age. All right, now you've taken your break, you've come on back. How long is it going to take to get back to where you were? So general rule of thumb you'll hear is however long your break was, about half that amount of time to retrain to where you were before the break. And you'll hear this a lot in, sort of like running circles, right? Like if you take 6 weeks off, it's going to take you 3 weeks to get, back to where you were for your cardiovascular endurance. Now, there is an interesting thing here with building strength specifically, which is that strength is easier to rebuild than it is to build the first time. And I don't think we actually have a concrete agreement on what the specific mechanisms of that are. And there's potentially a couple things. So one is that when you are building strength, one of the things that you're doing is you're building blood supply to that muscle. So when you come back to build that muscle up again, the infrastructure is already there. There could also be something to do with neurological adaptation. So when you are building strength the first time, you are not only building the strength mechanically, you're also building your understanding of how you're putting yourself in positions to build that strength, right? You're learning, those motor programs, if you believe in motor programs, but you're learning how to put your body into places, right? And you maintain that, right? That learning continues, that motor learning continues, and you don't necessarily lose that. And so this sort of bundle of things, which means that when you retrain, it is easier than training in the first place, is known as muscle memory in the literature, sort of broadly. And I've got some good citations down there if you want to read more deeply into this. But remember the study I told you about to put a pin in, right, where untrained folks, 10-week training program, 10 weeks off. And yes, they did lose strength then. In 5 weeks, they got back to where they were. And I mentioned there was a control group that had been training consistently. By the end of the study, there was no difference between those two groups, right? So if you take a break, but you come back and you are consistent, you can match your peers who never took a break. And that is the Hollonen et al. 2024 study. Does taking a break matter? Adaptations in muscle strength and size between continuous and periodic resistance training. So if you do take a break, yeah, when you come back, you are going to be behind the people who didn't, but you can not only get back to where you were, but you can catch up. So I think it can be really hard, especially if you started with like a peer group and you had to take a break for some reason, you come back and you're like, oh, everyone's so far ahead of me. I've lost all my strength. I'm so weak, blah, blah, blah. And as long as you can, deal with those feelings. They're real feelings, right? It sucks to lose strength. It sucks to have been able to do something and to come back and not be able to do something. And as long as you can put that aside and be like, yeah, okay, I can absolutely be upset about losing things. But if I am working consistently, I can catch back up with where I would have been if I had never taken a break. Again, just as long as you're being consistent, just so long as you keep showing up. So we're talking specifically about strength, pretty narrow. One of the reasons that people study this is that a 1 rep maximum is pretty easy to study, like that's easy to measure. There's very standard protocol, so it tends to be kind of a low-hanging fruit in this type of research. Not that it's easy to run these studies, but that it's, things that are easier to measure tend to get measured more often, as it turns out. A little #science fact for you. That said, that's getting the strength back. But pole is a body weight movement. If your body has changed, if your situation has changed, if you were on one type of pole and you're on another type of the pole, that doesn't necessarily mean that things are going to instantly go back to the way they felt. And depending on why you took the break, how long you took the break, and what else had changed in the world, your personal little bubble world around you, that may or may not be feasible to come back and do exactly what you were doing before. And that's okay. That's okay. I, right now, am not doing things, physically I can't do things that I did used to be able to do. All right, great example, aerial shoulder mount. It's something that I worked so hard for so many years, and I had it for a couple months in early 2020, and you'll never guess what happened then. Some pretty stressful fucking stuff. and I lost it. And I haven't gotten it back. And I haven't been training it consistently, right? And like so much has changed in my life since early 2020. I'm just never going to get back on that training schedule, right? I'm never going to get back on that training schedule where I was doing like personal training a couple times a week. And I, was taking a lot of in-person pole classes, and I was dancing a lot. And, the way that my life was then, let that happen. The way that my life is now, nah. And my life isn't worse. My life isn't worse. In fact, I would say in many ways, my life is better. I am certainly much more happy as a person. I'm certainly doing better. The old mentee H is doing significantly better than it was at that point in my life. But also, I've lost this trick. I'm probably not getting it back. I would have to change a lot of things in my life to get this one particular trick back. And so, I can be like, that was something that I did do and I was very proud of. And I can give that memory a little kiss on the cheek and send it off into the world. Right? And I am not a worse person for having lost that. I am not lesser for having lost that. That was something that was there for part of my life for a little bit. And I enjoyed it and it was nice. But I don't have to spend the rest of my life trying to contort myself around something that, in the end, is really not that important. Right? It doesn't have that big of an effect. It doesn't make me a better or worse friend. It doesn't, make me more or less able to show up for my community and do the stuff that really matters if I do or don't have a specific pole trick. So, like I said at the beginning, I think taking a break, we all have to do it sometimes for various reasons. When you do take a break, there is a reason, right? There was something that changed that made that happen, and acknowledge that. You don't have a separate... What's the show? Is it Severance? I think it's Severance. I haven't seen the show, but it's not like Severance, where my understanding of the show is that you have like split personalities. Your work personality that has no idea what's going on with the rest of their life. That's not how pole works. We show up to our pole time with everything that's happened to us that day, with everything that's happening to us in our life. And yes, we can absolutely try to make it like a safe little cocoon, a time when we can deconnect for that and to really, focus on our movement, our bodies, and feeling good and having fun, having our dance, having our flow. And I hope you do get that. I do hope you get that mental disconnect from pole, because for me, that's one of the most valuable things. It's part of the reason why I'm so into freestyle, because otherwise I got squirrel brain. And then when I'm freestyling, the squirrels shut up for 10 goddamn minutes. So that's really, really, really valuable for me in pole. But even though I do have that disconnect, I'm still showing up in the same body that, I did dishes in. I'm still showing up in the same body that, I'm sitting at my computer doing work in. I'm still showing up with my same body that I'm having to process everything that is happening in the world in, right? It's all connected. It's all together. It's all part of one system. And yeah, if you take a break, you can absolutely get back to where you were, if that is what is a priority for you right now. And if it's not, that's okay. That's okay. You're human. You're not only allowed to change, you are required to change. Pole will be there for you when you are ready for pole. And if that's a long time, it's going to take half-ish of that long time for you to get back to where you were. And that's okay. If that's something that's important to you, you'll make time for it. All right. That's all I got for you today about taking breaks, being nice to yourself. Hopefully, if there's a single core message that you can take from this particular episode, it is just to be gentle with yourself, right? Like, shit's real out there. We're all dealing with a lot. I know I am. I'm sure that you are. And it is not surprising that it is going to affect our bodies and how our movement feels. And in fact, it would be kind of weird if it didn't. So be nice to yourself. Be nice to each other. I hope you are doing well. You're taking care of yourself. You're helping support your community as best you can. And I will talk with you again very soon. Bye.